I went from at the peak physical and mental performance, excellent officer. I was in great physical shape, and then all of a sudden, I can't drive. I lost cognitive abilities. I lost long distance vision. I could only go to work for maybe 2 or 3 hours a day. And in the meantime, I'm begging the agency to take care of me, get me to a doctor.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Change Agents, an Ironclad original, presented by our incredibly spicy friends over at Firecracker Farm. Our guest today is a former CIA official who is believed to be a victim of a direct energy weapon attack after experiencing what is known as Havana Syndrome. Newly revealed evidence suggests that he and others were in fact targeted by an exotic new kind of microwave weapon, and that the CIA has tried to cover it up. His name is Marc Polymeropoulos, and he retired from the Senior Intelligence Service ranks in 2019 after 28 years in the intelligence community, including operational field and leadership assignments. He is the author of the book Clarity in Crisis: Leadership Lessons from the CIA. Let's dive in. Well, the NICO program, again, speaking as somebody who went through there, and it's a lot like if people enter into counseling or therapy, it's not that the counselor or therapist is doing the work for you. They're giving you homework, and the end state that you're going to achieve from that is largely based on the effort that you're willing to put in. Because the hard work happens not when you're talking to somebody like, hey, I'm sad, which I'm not trying to say people shouldn't do that, but I always try to let people know that the hard work does not occur during the likely hour session that you're going to be talking to somebody. That's the beginning of the homework, and that's where the real hard work begins. How did you find your way there? What was your journey like to get to the agency?
Origin story for the agency was, I have a kind of a unique childhood where my mom is American, my dad is Greek, and I was born in Greece, and so we spent a lot of time, going in the summers to Greece, the Greek islands, and so we just traveled constantly. So there was a bigger world out there. So I was actually interested in foreign policy and foreign affairs, and I read Tom Clancy books and stuff like that, and so I thought I wanted to do something like that. And, everyone looks back and tries to figure out kind of what was a seminal moment in their life. And I think it was, when I was 10 years old, and this is crazy, my crazy parents, maybe they were hippie parents, but my dad was doing a sabbatical. He was a professor at Rutgers University, and he was teaching in Algeria. North African country, hadn't been racked by an Islamic insurgency, and the country was nearly destroyed from that. But my mom put me on a plane by myself at JFK Airport in New York City. I went by myself through Paris, met my dad, and we spent a month in a Volkswagen minibus driving 2,000 miles through the Sahara Desert. And, just sleeping in desert oases. And I thought after that, man, I'm going to be freaking Lawrence of Arabia. I still have the picture of me like on a camel when I was 10.
How could you not think that?
Right,
it would be wrong for you to not feel that way.
And so that's what I wanted to do. And so I ended up, I went off to college, and agency recruiter was on campus, and I went there, and the guy there's a security guy with an earpiece or a protest on campus. And so I don't know how I got the job there. I mean, I was a punk ass college kid, probably drank too much and smoked too much weed, and somehow I made it through the background check. And then it ends up being the only job I ever had. I worked, 26 years there, and it was just a tremendous, I have so much kind of, still have good feelings about public service, the idea of doing something bigger than yourself. And I love that part of it. I mean, I'm a short dude. I'm, 5'8", but you really, you come back from places like, I was up on, in our early teams in Iraq and all the Afghan stuff. I was one of our base chiefs in Afghanistan for a year. And you walk taller after that. Like nobody can ever take that away from you. And you walk through our headquarters and you're like, you know what? I might have screwed things up. Maybe I'm not the greatest officer, but I really kind of went out and paid the rent, and and the American people are safer because of the stuff we did. And my views of the GWAT are interesting because the agency is a strange place in that, I wasn't building wells, I wasn't doing key leader engagements. We were there for just a very unique kind of find, fix, finish mission. And so again, when I sit around and I talk to some of my friends from kind of your old world or my old world, and I was like, and I had friends who were killed, it was awful. But like we did a lot of good shit there, and I'm really proud of it. And I mean, American, whether it's American servicemen and women or Americans, as we stop terrorist attacks, I'm proud of that. And so that's kind of the unique kind of function of the place. I know I kind of diverged a little, but there's, and through all the crap that I went through and fighting the agency afterwards for things we'll talk about, I still believe that, you need an intelligence service, second oldest profession. That's what I always
Yeah.
like to say.
Yeah, I would never argue against the need for that service, but I tell you what, man, I'm worried about our government and the direction that maybe not the entities writ large, but individuals inside of those entities seem to be able to act with impunity in ways that are not the design of those organizations. They don't serve the Constitution, and they don't seem to be serving the American people. It's a rough optic. Ladies and gentlemen, hot salt from Firecracker Farm is the real deal. It's not just heat, it's flavor that elevates everything that you cook. The best thing to happen to food since fire. That's a bold statement, but I'm going to go ahead and agree with that. It's delightful. One of the best things about this brand is there's a real person behind it. His name is Alex, and he makes these in small batches, so it's not always easy to get. You don't want to miss out. All of the flavors are great. I have tried all of them. You really can't go wrong. Seriously, try it on everything. Steaks, vegetables, everything in between. If you like milder heat, mix in some sea salt to dilute it. This is a choose your own adventure. You can go direct from the push button dispenser, or you can dilute to hit that flavor profile that you're looking for. The best way that you can help this show is to help Alex and his small family business by grabbing some hot salt and trying it for yourself. So go to Firecracker Farm and use the code Ironclad for 15% off of your first order. Alex would also like me to thank you, the audience, for giving his small business a shot. I'm telling you right now, head over to Firecracker Farm, pick something out. I honestly don't think that you can go wrong. It's an amazing product founded by a very cool person. The backstory behind it is legit, and it's going to make your food taste better.
So it's interesting as you get more senior, you see that, and so people ask me all the time, like, what's it like, what's it like? Are people at the agency reading? This happened before. I remember when I was in government, and Donald Trump was tweeting about Angela Merkel. He was angry at her and writing nasty tweets. Like, they're like, does that affect you? I'm like, nobody reads that. Like, so that if you're a case officer, on the ground somewhere, and so that's good. You got your job to do at a more senior level. And every administration, every CIA leadership is going to be political. I mean, they're chosen by the president, and so that's when things kind of get a little kind of hairy sometimes. But the one of the things that you probably saw this too is that when you're just a line officer somewhere, a grunt on the ground, or just kind of doing that job that you have that intense focus. It's only you're looking right at the target right in front of you. You don't care about anything else. And then when you get more senior, sometimes you come back. I mean, certainly I came back after Iraq. I mean, I spent years of my life dealing with the Iraq issue. And I sit back now and like, should we have, shouldn't we have? I don't know. Like, I remember we were in the team house in northern Iraq before the war. It was a joint agency and 10th Group Special Forces team, and watching Colin Powell's speech. And he's talking about the Iraqis having WMD. And I mean, we're in Iraq. I mean, we're living with the Kurds. And I remember I looked at one of my buddies. I'm like, I don't know what the hell he's talking about. I guess it's true. And it turns out it's not. And so despite us being at the tip of the spear, doing really great stuff, you kind of go back, and that's when you reflect on, were we well served by our intelligence leadership at that time? And the answer clearly was no.
I mean, I can add to that story. The unit I was with actioned the #1 chem bio target in Iraq the night that the war kicked off. And it was an agricultural school with it had a greenhouse attached to it. I remember looking at the satellite imagery before, and they're like, yes, look, 2 times a year, they connect it with this tunnel, and this is how they're moving all. It's like, yeah, that's like Visqueen. And in there was a tomato plant. And I remember, I don't know if this actually happened or this is a story we told ourselves, but they came over SATCOM. It's like, hey, there's a tomato plant in there. They're like, yeah, we'll bring some samples back. I swear they asked us to bring some samples back, but they also might not have.
So one of my buddies, again, this is the giant, as the hunt for WMD. Great friend of mine. He ended up being our, serving all over the world, because he was our base chief in Tikrit at the time. And I remember he came to me and he goes, hey, we just raided this, this WMD facility. We thought it was. I said, what was it? He goes, well, it was a kind of a drug warehouse for the Iraqi version of the DEA, and there was like thousands of pounds of hashish there. And my friend's all messed up from this. He goes, I've been in there breathing it. It's all over me. Like, I can't even walk. It was so funny. So, yeah, those are, and here's the thing too, is if you're out in public, you are now, and I talk in public as well, you got to answer those questions. When people say, all right, thanks for your service, but what about the faulty intelligence that went to the invasion of Iraq? And you're like, right. Yeah. I mean, you can't deny that.
It's interesting, as a younger man, and especially unproven in that particular profession. And it's weird to say, but I think you'll understand this, and maybe some of the listeners will too. if you're untested and unproven, it's almost as if you wish to be tested and proven. And my father was a Vietnam War veteran, or is a Vietnam War veteran, still alive. And I tell you what, the conversations we had and the things that he was saying about, like, I'm not buying this. Like, I've seen this happen with my generation. And I had argued against him.
Yeah.
Like, no,
So did I.
this is what our intelligence is. And because I watched the Colin Powell speech as well, too. And all of those things are like, I've seen the intelligence, Dad. And what I hadn't seen was the intelligence. I had seen reports, 18 layers removed, written off intelligence that didn't clearly exist at the time. And now I sit back and, we're recording this in March of 2026. And I'm looking at what's going on in the world, and I find myself vocally saying, like, listen, I'm not buying this. I don't want to see troops committed to the ground. I don't want to see these acts taken unless they're a measure of last resort. And I find myself increasingly and inherently distrustful of our government and the people that are on mainstream media trying to go down with this messaging again.
It's funny you say that. So, I think we have a shared mutual friend. Mick Mulroy is a great buddy of mine. I think he's a neighbor of yours too, in Montana. You know Mick, right?
Yep, I do. Yeah.
Yeah. And so Mick and I were on that team up in Northern Iraq, and then amazingly enough, I replaced him as a base chief in Afghanistan. So we've just gone through this many times. And in talking to Mick recently, it's also, he actually shares that same skepticism. And it's, by the way, what pisses me off is when you hear people say, hey, you're being unpatriotic and questioning. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Not for all the people that we buried. All the friends that we buried, all this, and all this stuff that we saw, and that actually really angers me. And I mean, it's, first of all, the frankly, whether it's a podcast here or any member of the press, like, you have to hold government accountable. And one of the things that you see now, I was watching the press conference today, so Pete Hegseth is up there giving his rah-rah JV speech, and then Chairman of the Joint Chiefs Kane is there, and it all sounds really good. And in particular, I call it military math. We're great at giving figures on all the incredible damage we're doing to the Iranian Navy and ballistic missile inventory. And that's great. That's fine. But I mean, you and I, we've seen this before. I saw those same briefings in Afghanistan. I saw those same briefings in Iraq. And so it's okay to say, okay, that might even be true or not true or whatever. But, what about the strategy? What's going on here? Let alone the whole idea that, the campaign of the current president was not to do what we're doing, getting involved in the Middle East war. But I think questioning that stuff, you're not being unpatriotic. In fact, it's the opposite way. And if someone can't come back, I'm all up for debate.
Yeah.
So someone's got to come back to us and say, okay, this is the goals. This is actually why it's working, and you have a discussion. But the idea that we're not allowed to question it, I think, is crazy. Particularly with the 20 years of the GWAT. I mean, I heard those briefings forever.
Yeah. No, it's wild. I would love to have a definable end state. That's one of the main things that I've always talked about, especially given our experience in Iraq and Afghanistan. Like, give me the metrics by which we are measuring success or efficacy. This episode is sponsored by Norwood Sawmills. And if you've ever thought about milling your own lumber, or you just like the idea of being able to build something from the ground up, these guys are worth checking out. Norwood makes portable sawmills that lets you turn raw logs into your own boards right on your property. And one of their most popular mills is the Lumbermate LM30. That's Lima Mike 30. It's powerful, built to last, and designed to handle everything from softer woods to tough hardwoods without a problem. It can cut logs up to 30 inches in diameter, and it's made so that whether you are a beginner, a landowner, or someone with serious projects, you can actually produce quality lumber yourself. And here's the part that you don't want to miss. We've partnered with Norwood to give one of these bad boys away. The giveaway will be live from March 30th through April 3rd, so you've got a limited window to enter. Make sure you're following at This Is Ironclad and at Norwood Sawmills on Instagram, and keep an eye on those pages for all the details on how to enter. If you've ever wanted to mill your own lumber, this is your chance. The fact that we're able to do this, and this is another one that I'm starting to harp on too, is, we haven't declared war since World War II, right? So this authorized use of military force, which has clearly been manipulated by every president that has served while it exists. We're at war without being able to define being at war. And if we don't find our way to a place where we can put some checks and balances on this stuff, I don't think we're headed into a realm that's going to serve this country well in the long term. We need to take a look at some of these things.
The idea of congressional authorization, I think it's important. Somehow that's again, and by the way, every single president doesn't do this. So we're not just picking on the current administration.
Totally. Like I said, the AUMF has been manipulated by every president
Every
since it's
president,
been put into place.
everything. And the other thing, one of my pet peeves from today or the last couple of days, I was watching the hearings of the intelligence community, both in front of the House and the Senate oversight committees, and it's the idea of this discussion of imminence. And the DNI Tulsi Gabbard has said, and I understand they're all trying to protect the president, but she said that the president makes that determination on imminence, and nobody challenges her. No, not a single member of the office. And I was thinking, well, that's actually not true. I mean, I did those things for a living. So in the kinetic activity that we had to undertake, we actually had to, the IC had to make a determination on imminence. It goes to a kind of interagency process. The president's going to give the thumbs up or thumbs down, but the imminence call is actually the intelligence community. And so
So
again,
that's what I thought when I saw her response. And again, I didn't say anything because I didn't know what to say because I didn't come from the intelligence world. But I find it bizarre that one person sitting in that chair is the determining factor as to whether or not there is a threat or the imminence. I thought, and I'm glad that you have clarified this for me, that there were actual organizations and entities that collect this data, work together. I mean, and maybe it's a matter of probability, like, hey, we estimate or we assess this at an 80 to 90% probability. And like you said, the person gives the thumbs up or the thumbs down. But to say that it's the person, the commander in chief is the one that decides whether or not
not
it's
true.
imminent. It didn't make sense to me,
Yeah,
but I mean, I've never been in those rooms. I've never
yeah,
been consultant on those things. I'm
right.
like, I guess, but that doesn't ring true to me.
And we to take someone's life, and again, this is from the IC perspective in our kind of kinetic programs. You had that actually had to be, it's not I mean, look, I'm all for vengeance and retribution. I'm just going to be on a personal level, but on a professional level, it's got to be there's kind of an ongoing, imminent, continuous threat. If you don't have that, you can't launch that Hellfire missile. You can try to capture someone and put them on trial for previous crimes, but for kinetic action, it's got to be the imminence part of it. And again, it's one of those things in which you wonder. I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of senators and representatives who should know that their staff should, and they just kind of that just sailed through. And that's the kind of stuff in watching some of the coverage on the media that frustrates me, that you don't have people actually who. And the other thing is, I also think that there's a lot of people who've left government, and whether it's from people left because they don't like the administration, because they got fired, purges. But look, I'm just a former CIA officer. I retired in 2019. Like, there should be an army of lawyers at the NSC and other places who are like, well, hold on a second. Okay, even if you misspoke, DNI, like, that's actually not true. This is the process, and there's just silence. I don't know what's going on.
Well, and it's like, let's walk the dog on that theory. Okay, so if he is the only person that decides whether or not there's an imminent threat, what if he wakes up one morning and says, I think Mexico is an imminent
Exactly.
threat?
Right. Yeah.
So, like, I don't know, you know what I mean? It's like, so it's true in a narrow set of circumstances, but not absolutely. In other places, it can't, you know what I mean? So I was just thinking about that. It didn't ring true to me. And I agree with you. Nobody pushed back on that.
No pushback. So interesting times, that's for sure. I mean, the I think there's the good thing. There's some I like coming on shows like this where you can have a deep dive. I mean, you can't go on a 10-second TV hit and say this
No.
item. So
Yeah, good luck with that. Well, let's dive into actually what has us talking here today. Talk to me about your exit and experience with the agency and why we're sitting down talking today.
and I like to kind of start this off again with the notion. I really believe in the CIA's mission. We have to be able to provide that kind of critical intelligence to policymakers. I think that the agency certainly can lose their way sometimes, but I mean, I love the job. I was a case officer, so that's the idea of spotting, assessing, developing, recruiting and handling agents, people we recruited, foreigners, and there's that. It's an extraordinary job because at the end of the day, you have someone's life in your hands. So it's a Russian or an Iranian or a Syrian or a member of Al Qaeda who have betraying their organization. I would say not their countries or entities, but and they're working for the good guys, and so you have this incredible responsibility. So that part of it I loved. And the idea of protecting the American people. And for me, in 26 years, as a case officer, I kind of went back and forth between the Near East Division and then Counterterrorism Center. I spent a ton of time in the sandbox, and so I postings at embassies all over the Middle East, and then almost 3 years in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and other places. At the end of my career, and this is unfortunately what happens when you get promoted. So I was the deputy and then the acting operations chief over Europe and Eurasia. So it was a huge job in the senior executive service. And so because of that, because I didn't know jack shit on Russia or anything like that. I mean, when you get promoted like that, you become a kind of a corporate entity. I went. I was making a trip to Moscow and St. Petersburg in December of 2017 to meet our ambassador at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, John Huntsman, who is a really well-known public official. He'd be an ambassador in China, ambassador in Russia. He was a former governor of Utah, I think. He was a good man. And amazingly enough, I was going to meet with our counterparts in the Russian intelligence services, which sounds weird, but you have to have that channel open. Now, the channel sucks. It's nasty. You don't like them. They don't like us. But you always have to have a line of communication open. And we had that even during the Cold War with the KGB. And so in this case, it was the SVR, the External Russian Service, and the FSB, the Internal Service. And so off I go to Moscow. And what happened is, in the initial parts of the trip, and I'm doing nothing operationally there. I'm declared to the. They know I'm coming. I'm a senior executive coming. And they actually, I battled them in the Middle East forever. So I mean, they knew who I was. But I woke up in the middle of the night at a 5-star hotel a couple blocks from the U.S. Embassy with a splitting headache, a migraine, about an 8-9 level, incredible vertigo. The room is spinning. I'd never experienced that before. It was actually pretty terrifying. I've been shot at a million times, but this was terrifying. It caused me physically sick. I had tinnitus, which is ringing in my ears, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners have that experience too from blast stuff. And so something awful happened. And that started this, really, terrible journey in which I, for a couple of years when I remained in service, I battled the agency. And then when I left, I almost turned into a whistleblower. Because, something clearly happened to me. I went back to the States after about 10 days. And I was a mess. I mean, I went from at the, peak physical and mental performance, I was a, excellent officer. I was in great physical shape. And then all of a sudden, I can't drive. I lost cognitive abilities. I lost long distance vision. I could only go to work for maybe 2 or 3 hours a day. And in the meantime, I'm begging the agency to take care of me, get me to a doctor. I mean, literally, I went to an Office of Medical Services and said, just send me to a doctor. And I started learning, of course, some of my symptoms were what fellow officers experienced the year before at the U.S. Embassy in Havana, Cuba in 2016. And so I talked to them and so, wait a second. Something, the Cuba, Russia, our guys are all jammed up there. I have the same symptoms. And I basically asked, send me to a doctor. In fact, it was University of Pennsylvania was the entity that was treating our people. And they wouldn't do it. And they just refused for whatever reason. And I just started this incredible battle with our medical staff. But, they kept refusing all of my treatment. And so by summer of 2019, when I turned 50, I was eligible to retire. I mean, I literally could not go through it. I was leaving after 2 or 3 hours. Still really highly thought of because in our deputy director of operations, that's the chief spy of the whole agency. She actually at the time asked me to come up and be one of her deputies. So I wasn't disgruntled. I was really well thought of, but I couldn't go to work and I couldn't even function. And I had incredible pain, drinking way too much, and I was a mess. So I had to retire in July of 2019.
Why would any agency, CIA or any other agency, deny medical treatment or care for somebody that is begging for it? What did they're just like, no, we don't have the budget? I mean, what answer did they give you?
They gave me a million answers. And let me just say, everything that I'm telling you now, I documented, other people documented. It's all been turned over, by the way, to congressional oversight. And there's a big investigation. So the agency, stupidly on their part, good for me, put all this shit in writing. So there's tons of receipts on this. They accused me of trying to get, Department of Labor benefits to make money off of this compensation. It's crazy. For me to retire with kind of full Department of Labor benefits actually financially does not make any sense. And why would I retire? I was a very good officer in that place. And they just absolutely kind of dug their heels in. And it's one of those things. And, I would sit back and I'd say, you know what? I did so much for this organization. You make a weird pact, especially in the operational side. Like, I think I was involved in every covert action program in the Middle East for 20 years. A lot of them super controversial. But I always accepted that. We were a tool of the U.S. government at the tip of the spear. But I always thought if I got jammed up, they'd have my back. And I did get jammed up, and they didn't. And it was just a mystery to me. And even when I retired, I kept in touch with the organization because at that time they started letting people into Walter Reed, to the traumatic brain injury clinic there. It's called NICO, the National.
I've been through it.
Yeah, you've been there. You've been there too, and it's an incredible place. But because our officers were like, hey, and the doctors there, like the blast injuries from war zones look a lot like what some of these folks have experienced in Havana and myself. And by the way, just as I retired, other people from around the world who were working on Russian operations were starting to come back from the field with the same symptoms. So I said, just get me to Walter Reed. And again, they refused. They put it all in writing. And so what I finally did in October 2020, I chose a journalist, Julia Yaffe from GQ, from Gentleman's Quarterly. Julia was a Russia specialist, and she wrote this massive article. And this is really weird for me. I turned into a whistleblower. The not where I and it kind of exploded after that. It embarrassed the agency. Literally the next day, three former CIA directors called the current CIA director at the time, Gina Haspel, and said basically, "What the fuck? Like, hey, we know Marc. Like he was, goddamn it, he was in Iraq and Afghanistan all those years. Like,
Yeah.
he's not asking for anything. Send him to damn Walter Reed." And then I did get to go. And so in January of 21, I finally went to Walter Reed. But that's where the break from the place went. And at the same time, people now, my colleagues who are working Russian operations, are coming down, whether it's in Hanoi, in Belgrade, in Warsaw, Vienna. Hotspots of Russian intelligence activity are coming down with this too. And again, superstars, case officers who've done the most sensitive stuff are coming back almost vegetables from this. So something really messed up is happening. And so, after that, I kind of devoted a lot of my time, which I'm doing now, is to talking about this, because it's a giant cover up. I mean, you can't refute any of that. And some of the things that are happening now, 60 Minutes did a big piece. We can talk about that in a second, but the rent's due now and the receipts are there. And so this is one of those things. I think it's going to be like, burn pits, Agent Orange, Gulf War syndrome, things the government initially, denied, and then just people have receipts, and it turns out to be a pretty big scandal. And kind of that's where we are now. It's a really weird position for me to be in. It's not something I'm all that comfortable in, but I know my fellow, the other, and I don't even want to call them victims, survivors. We're supposed to define it in some way. You remember this from NICO, from kind of blast injury stuff. I don't know what the best way to say it is, but they deserve, to be heard, to get health care, and for this not to be a cover up.
So why do you think, I mean, I could, not that I understand, but I guess that is the word. I'm not trying to apply justification to this. It's like, okay, if Russia has a direct energy weapon, yes, I could understand them trying to keep it secret and doing a cover up. Why would the agency try to keep it secret and do a cover up? Is this them not being willing or wanting to say, hey, this technology exists? They don't want to worry about the liability. Like, what the fuck? Like, it makes sense that if somebody has this new weapon, yeah, you want to keep that secret. But on the receiving end, wouldn't you want to, like, maybe we'll be good allies to our partners and warn some people, like, hey, maybe we could develop a counter technology to this. Like, why cover it up?
So I think two things happened, and again, I think we'll get to the bottom of this now. I mean, there was in today's hearing, today's intelligence hearing, Rick Crawford, the head of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, basically challenged all the leaders of the intelligence community. They said, kind of recall your previous assessments that this was nothing, because that's what they assessed, and they all said that they would. And so we're getting there. But two things happened. One is, when this was happening to a lot of us, and again, the agency, it's like, I mean, think about your old world. Everybody. When I joke around and say it's a cult. I mean, you really, it's very hard to get into, hard to get kicked out of, but and you're there for your lifetime. And so, friends of mine who had overseas assignments were pulling out of them. They're saying, well, hold on a second. Like, because it's not just officers who were hit, their family members were, for example, in Belgrade, an officer I know, she was a rock star. She also had a 6-month-old baby. She's in her apartment. She gets hammered by this thing, and the baby ends up having a 6-month-old has a traumatic brain injury. It has irrecoverable injuries, and so people are starting to pull out of assignments. So I do know that there was an announcement made by the then operations chief at the time saying, we got to put this behind us. We're not going to get people to go to the field. And the next part of it, though, I think is the more kind of malicious part of it. And actually, this is the part I really do believe is that this was an act of war perpetrated by the Russians. And I think there's almost consensus now that it was them against U.S. officials. And by the way, it's not only just U.S. Intelligence officers, diplomats, also U.S. military as well. And I'll tell you a story, and it's a really bad story about a U.S. military member hit. And it's an act of war. And so, any administration, and again, I don't care if it's a Republican or a Democratic side, what do you do with that? How do you, because you have to respond. And I go
Yeah.
back to, and you'll remember this, Andy. There was an incredible kind of explosion of reporting at one point about, if you can recall, the Russians were providing or giving bounties to the Taliban to kill U.S. soldiers. That was, every friend of mine who covered that said, is unbelievably clear intelligence. And successive administrations were like, yeah, but it's kind of medium confidence. We can't really do anything unless we're sure. And so nobody wants to ever confront the Russians, and it drives me nuts. And by the way, Biden
Meanwhile,
was like it, and Trump was like
apparently the president is the one who gets to decide whether the threat level was high or low. Let's go with the modern standard. Like, where are you at? Now you're going to rely on the IC
yeah,
for their assessment, and you're not going to be the person making the call. Okay.
yeah. And so I think that there was a reluctance to confront the Russians on this. And so you put that together, and that's just, of course, the wrong answer. Now, one of the things that happened is in with the Russians' invasion of Ukraine. Um, you know, the attacks did not diminish totally, but certainly kind of slowed down, and that makes some sense. The Russians are busy. And so, I always suspected the Russians, they've always had a directed energy program. There's plenty of open source on this. But then you get to a point, and again, I'm out of government since 2019, but I'm hearing from friends, and then you hear the press really take interest in this. And I'll just point to the 60 Minutes piece from a couple weeks ago, where and CNN and then some other journalists as well have reported that DOD at the end of the Biden administration actually went out in the black market and bought one of these devices, from kind of Russian criminal slash intelligence sources. It exists. And they
Yeah.
and then they brought it back and they tested it, the Army Research Labs, again, according to the press. I got to be careful on that. So how can, by the way, that the agency kind of, when they dug in its heels and kept providing assessments to the world saying there's no evidence this exists? Well, of course it does. And so kind of now we absolutely know this for sure. And so, it's one of those things. And on a good note, this is out now. Nobody, I talked to so many people on Capitol Hill, members of, people in the Pentagon, in the IC, particularly the operational side. I think it's going to come to the point now where now that the IC is going to have to assess that this happened. But again, okay, so it's just the administration now. I'm not picking on the Trump administration, because Biden would have the same thing. As, what do you do about it? And so I think that really that terrifies policymakers. I can imagine an NSC meeting saying, "All right, well, shit, what do we do now?" And nobody wants to do that, except for, if you want to protect your people, the men and women who serve. You got to take action, or the Russians get away with it.
So, based off of what you can tell, and obviously this is going to be, again, you got to be careful what the press says for sure. Become fascinated by people who watch only one outlet, depending on which jersey of their team aligns with, and they consider themselves to be well informed, and they don't realize that they're in an echo chamber, which is fine. Everybody get your news from where you want to. Just maybe understand that it could have a political bent to it. Based off of what you've been able to find, what were they able to buy? Like, how does this thing actually work?
Yeah, so the Russians, it's the Soviets have been experimenting with directed energy weapons for a long time. I guess it's pulsed microwave energy, and this is designed to incapacitate someone. I mean, look, the U.S. government has these with LRADs, the long range acoustical devices. I mean, and not that it's the same thing that U.S. forces used in the Maduro raid in Venezuela. But remember, Trump's talking about the discombobulator. I mean, there are things in which countries and governments have developed such kind of novel weapons, which can incapacitate an enemy. And so that's always kind of been out there. But you mentioned it's look, I am an advocate for this. I talk to people on the far right, the far left. I don't care which journal. I'll talk to Fox News. I'll talk to anybody on this. And basically every national security reporter I know from both sides of the aisle actually believe this to be true now. And I mean, there's you can go on 60 Minutes, or you can go on any other show. I mean, on Fox, and both are reporting the same thing now. And countries have this weapon, and I wouldn't be surprised if we do as well. There's just the notion of, what do you use it for? Police forces in the United States will use it, again, for an acoustical weapon to incapacitate a mob, a crowd.
Yeah, protest stuff. I've seen that.
That's normal. This is different, though. This is actually doing it nefariously to kind of take out people, who are not necessarily on the battlefield. And so, the idea that there's any debate on whether these things exist or not is kind of silly. And then the other thing is, I mean, I have friends who are on boards of companies There's a company called Epirus that has built a machine just like this to knock drones out of the sky. Again, it's that's part of the world too. So this is just the Russians doing this against our people, and that is the difference. And so I think that one of the concerns on this too is if we don't combat this now, if we don't kind of put this forward as a technology that can be used on the battlefield, other adversaries are going to have this. There's no reason. I mean, there's a lot of thought. Do the Chinese have this? The Iranians have it. Because if they see the effects that have been, that they've had on U.S. persons now, why wouldn't you? And the other part too is think about. I mean, this has caused enormous dissension within the U.S. government as well. There are debates on this. People have fights about it. But let me just tell you, I think again for your listeners, your viewers, a story, and this was incredible to me. I mentioned it when I was on 60 Minutes, and I got to be careful saying this because I don't want to betray this individual's confidence. But there was a member of the U.S. military who was serving in Central Asia. He was absolutely nailed by this. Comes back, goes through NICO. This is from the special operations world. This individual, and ultimately, he gets treated, and then his leadership rightfully puts him in for a Purple Heart. It goes through the entire process. It gets approved. There's a ceremony that's going to be, he knows about it, tells his family. There's a ceremony where this is going to be presented to him. And the chief of the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA chief, nixes it at the last second because he says, no, the CIA doesn't agree that this stuff is real. We can't do this. This is during the Biden administration. And that to me is abhorrent. And I was provided all of this information. I thought about, what do I do with this over the years? And finally, I'm telling the story, not not divulging who this is, but that's wrong in so many different ways. Again, it's an individual who is hurt and treated at NICO, but doesn't deserve a Purple Heart because the CIA is the one kind of bullying the rest of the intelligence community, saying this stuff doesn't exist. That to me was just reprehensible.
Today's episode is brought to you by GhostBed. I've spent most of my adult life in environments where performance matters. And one thing that I have learned the hard way is that recovery is not optional, especially as we get older. Sleep is the foundation. If that's off, everything is going to be off. I took GhostBed's online quiz. It came back with the Luxe foam as the best fit for me based on how I sleep and the level of support that I prefer. It's a medium firm setup, balanced support underneath with a more plush, cooling feel on top. I hate sleeping hot, so this mattress helps with that. That combination makes sense to me. I don't want something that's overly soft, but I also don't want something that feels like I'm on a board, so this hits in the middle in a good way. GhostBed is also an American-made, family-owned product, and they back it with a 101-night trial and a 20-year warranty. That's going to tell you that they believe in what they're building. So if you're looking at upgrading your sleep setup, go to ghostbed.com/ironclad. You're going to get an extra 15% off automatically with the code IRONCLAD. That's all one word, all caps. Thanks again to GhostBed for partnering with us.
The revolutionary audio docuseries, hosted by Sean Ryan.
They're called PsyOps.
Is now available for free on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Target Intelligence, PsyOp, an Ironclad original.
And now, back to our program.
So knowing what you know about that particular entity, obviously the agency, what would it take for them to admit that something like this is real? Is this somebody literally putting something down on a table on like 60 Minutes and being like, this is what I'm talking about? I mean,
they have that world. It's at the Army Research Labs. They have a fucking device. I mean, it's just
the Army Research Labs probably isn't going to do a Zoom call with Fox
News
and put it on the table. That's what I mean. So like knowing what you know about the agency and the intelligence community, what would it take for them to say, okay, you got us, now we'll address it?
And they've changed. So it's a great question because originally their assessment was these things can't ever exist. The technology's not there. Well, that's bullshit. And then they said, well, we've never seen a device. Well, that's bullshit. You have one. DOD does. And so, I mean, the only conceivable thing now is, I don't know, you want to catch a Russian GRU officer from the unit that we know. It's GRU Unit 29155. We know that. There's been incredible deep dives done by some journalists on this. So you want to catch them in the act? I mean, what do you want me to do? Like, you want to go hire some of our old buddies and go do a private rendition? I'm happy to do it. I mean, trust me, I've thought about that. And so, ultimately, I think that, it's an organization that has dug in their heels so much. The other part of this too is there's still people at the agency at senior levels who are involved in the cover up. And I said that on 60 Minutes. I mean, put it this way. The 60 Minutes piece was so interesting because you had a Biden NSC official, Dr. David Relman, who was there. He was in the Biden White House. And he was asked on camera, and he said, yes, the CIA covered this up. I was called down to the Situation Room in the last days of the Biden administration. And I didn't know, because if you piece it together, I didn't know that they had actually procured one of these devices. And the head of intelligence programs there, for a 4-hour meeting with me in the sit room, myself and a couple other survivors of this, they said, we're sorry, we apologize. You were right. This shit's real. And we're gonna and I didn't know why they were doing that. I welcomed that. But it's obviously because there's new intelligence that came in. And I asked them very clearly, the NSC officials, I said, you realize the CIA covered this up, and they all acknowledged that. And then you had one of these officials go on camera. I mean, what more do you need? And again, this is a Biden NSC official saying the Biden CIA covered it up. That's pretty extraordinary. And so again, it's one of those things there. What's it ever going to take for the agency to come clean on this? I don't know. And here's a really big part of this too. There's a tremendous moral injury that I'm going to be personal that I've suffered on this. Again, organization that I gave everything to. You know what I'm talking about here. This is not a 9-to-5 job. It was my life, my entire identity. And maybe that's bad, but it was absolutely, created, fostered, nurtured, and lived experiences with the CIA. And then these people, and by the way, I know them all. They betrayed me and other victims. And man, I'm still going to the shrink at NICO. I mean, I had an appointment, today. I couldn't make it for a reason, but the moral injury is real. The betrayal is extraordinary. And there's a lot of anger involved there. Again, strangely enough, an organization that I want to see succeed, and I believe in what we have to do. But man, these are people I knew, and that's been really tough.
Given its current structure and existence, do you think it is capable of succeeding?
No.
Or is it headed in a downward trajectory?
Yeah, I mean, I was at an intelligence conference at St. Andrews University in Scotland. Someone asked me a question. They were surprised. I said, you got to blow the whole place up. Not literally, but I said, you got to tear it down. The CIA, and I think the analytic component is totally discredited and politicized, and the operational side has to be removed from it, because there were things that were done back in 2016, and it was called modernization. It was under the John Brennan era, and they basically squished everyone together, and it makes everyone, they called them, like, it was a purple officer, meaning you can have ops officers and analysts working in the same unit. In fact, an analyst can be the head of counterterrorism mission center. In fact, they are now, which I think is preposterous. And that really kind of neutered the operational side. You have to get us back to kind of the OSS days of taking much more risk. And I think that the way the world operates now, with the ubiquitous technical surveillance environment, and I know the military's thinking this too. It's very hard to hide from a U.S. embassy. You have to do things under commercial cover. Get into the weeds a little bit here, but I think the agency has to be torn down and rebuilt totally, and separate the analytical side and have an operational unit, which is, takes smart managed, but can be aggressive. But the place is just not capable right now. And, I saw John Ratcliffe, the CIA director. He said, foreign intelligence production is up 25%, acquisition of sources up 25%, morale's great. And that's all just complete horseshit. My friends from inside were texting me today, and they're saying, I can't believe this. The place is still utterly broken. And again, here's the disappointing part is every administration, Democratic or Republican, comes in promising to fix CIA, and they do nothing. And yeah. I remember, when Bill Burns, the former CIA director, came into office, he had been my ambassador in Amman, Jordan, at the beginning of my career. And so he becomes Joe Biden's CIA chief. And he called me in one time and he said, what do you think? And I said, okay, well, let me just tell you something. CIA is really good at one thing, and that's what I'm good at, and that's killing people. The Find, Fix, Finish kinetic mission, we crushed it in the GWAT. Al-Qaeda was destroyed. A lot of it was because of, CIA management of the overall campaign plan, of course, with our special operations brothers as well. But we're great at that. But we're terrible at hard target recruitments. We've fallen off on Russia, China, and our analytic capabilities are awful. We missed the Arab Spring. We missed WMD in Iraq. The Arab Spring, we missed that. We make all these analytic calls that are awful. And so, we were great at one thing. And we're still really good at that. But on the fundamentals of recruiting a penetration of the Russian presidential administration or the Chinese Communist Party, we're not good at that, and that's because fundamentally we're not structured right. You can't have analysts in charge. You can't operate out of embassies. You have to kind of revamp the whole place. And He didn't take my advice, and then John Ratcliffe comes in now in the Trump administration, says all the right things, and does nothing again. So I would say you got to tear the whole place down. And I'm not one. I was never one for radical change like that, but I've changed my mind entirely. It's also based on this experience too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I worry about more than just the agency. I worry about many sectors of our government. It's fascinating to see how much weaponization and politicization seems to be infiltrating, we'll just call it the alphabet soup agencies, and also how much people aren't paying attention and how much they aren't recognizing how much we are surrendering when it comes to our actual freedoms. I'm reading an article the other day about the FISA program, and then Section 702, which is getting ready to expire next month, and the hundreds of thousands of unconstitutional queries, and the fact that, these these systems and databases and these entities that are supposed to be external looking and looking to protect us. And we complain about all these other states. I'll use China as an example. Oh, these people live in a surveillance state. I'm like, have you taken a look into the capabilities of our own government and what they're using those systems for? And if they have to, they'll go out on the commercial market and buy information about their own citizens. And of course, this is all under the guise of protection and foreign enemies and all this stuff, but so much other stuff is wrapped up inside of that. And then if they really want to, they can just go to a Five Eyes ally and just have them look inward. So therefore it doesn't violate any protocol or procedure anyway. And nobody is paying attention to this. And so all these other entities, like you're saying, in addition to the CIA, they're all wrapped up into that structure as well too. And that's where I come to these questions of like, can we salvage this? Or are we just headed down a path that just leads nowhere good?
I think the 702 program is so interesting because you do need remnants. You do need elements of that. We killed Ayman Zawahiri based on 702 collect.
And I'm not saying get rid of it, but
But
wow.
you have to reform it, and there's got to
Yeah.
be kind of reforms. And what I find interesting in all these things is, it seems like it's always it's a black and white issue instead of kind of the middle ground of, okay, we got to reform it and put things in place. But there is and I sound like a crazy conspiracy theorist, but the national security state, envelops any administration that comes in. I mean, again, I'm going to pick a little bit on the Trump administration, but I would have picked on the Biden administration because everybody comes in saying we need reform, and they never do anything. And you have Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, the chief and the former deputy of the FBI, literally are protecting the FBI from all the things where they were making all these allegations, when they were outside government. Nothing ever changes. And I think if you serve inside the national security world, I actually am a huge proponent of congressional oversight. People think I'm crazy when I say that. I said, no, you can't trust me with the powers that I had at CIA. I need someone looking over my shoulder, and at times the oversight can play a very a good role on that. Because bottom line is, I actually work for the American people. And so I should have to explain all the things that we do if we have, certain powers on surveillance or on kinetic activity. And those things are actually really important. So there's got to be this a mixture of, we have to have the tools to take it to our enemies, but we also have to make sure about our civil liberties are protected. But the amazing thing to me is every administration from the left or the right come back to the same conclusion all the time, and nothing ever changes.
The Trump administration, just requested that the 702 program go forward, no changes for the next 4 years.
I mean, it's kind of funny because these same people kind of were railing against it before. But once you get into power, I mean, I don't know what happens. I made a joke to the joke with Bill Burns, the CI chief, when he came in. He goes, what about your tribe, like the director of operations? I said, don't believe us. And he laughed. He goes, you're talking about your own people? I said, yeah, like just be skeptical of everything. If we say, a great example is a covert action program. Covert action programs are designed to have an end state, and then they last forever. And so what we should do is, we should be questioned on them all the time. These are kind of really unique abilities. And so, I think people don't understand the power that the intelligence community and the national security state can have. And it's okay to put checks and balances on that. It's important. And I think CIA officers, actually, most people welcome that. I always used to joke when with some members of congressional oversight, like, I got to ask you permission to go to the bathroom, but that's okay. I'm good with that. Because we can't be trusted without having someone look over us. There's just too much power that is invested in you, as in the intelligence community, and you should welcome that. Good. I need a check. You know what? Because sometimes you sit around and you come up with some kind of crazy ideas, and you need a lawyer to say, "Yeah, I'm not so sure we should do that." That's a really bad idea.
Yeah, no, it all makes sense, man. And it's good to hear somebody from inside of that world saying those things because I'm an outsider to this and I'm looking at this and just, I'm like, I have no lens to use other than what I think to be a reasonable human's thought
Yeah.
process. And a lot of the stuff I see, it doesn't make sense.
I mean, so
So,
perfect example. I always got to be careful, but there was I think Bob Woodward wrote in his book about this. So I'll use a perfect example. I had served in Damascus, many moons ago, and I remember in one of the previous administrations, Bashar al-Assad, the former Syrian president, was a huge pain in the ass, and someone, I think it was in the first Trump administration, I think Trump might have said, "Let's get rid of him," and so someone called me and said, "Hey, they're talking about this kind of stuff," and I'm like, "You can't do that." And they said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "It violates an executive order, like Executive Order 12333. Like, yeah, I could tell you where he is right now because I live there, and it's not secret. But someone's got to say, well, hold on a second, where's the lawyer saying?" And they did. And Jim Mattis, and this was written about in the book, Jim Mattis, Secretary of Defense, is like, "Yeah, we can't really do that because that's actually illegal." And so, but my worry is sometimes people are not there to have that moral courage and say, "Yeah, we can't do that. Yep, this guy's an asshole."
yeah,
And so the and every president on both parties kind of gets romanced by the notion of and because the other thing is because we're really good and the special operations world is really good. The Maduro raid is a perfect example. To me it was there's a debate on whether we should have done this or not, and that's
yeah,
fine. What's more extraordinary is that we can. And it's the same thing with manhunting, with taking out the Iranian, the decapitation strikes with the in Iran, and that was a joint U.S.-Israeli effort. So we're at a point in our capabilities, not that can we do something? We can go snatch someone anywhere on the planet. We can go kill someone in the question is, should we? And that's where it goes to kind of having that that moral courage of people saying, yeah, maybe that's not a great idea. Because in the past, by the way, at the beginning of our careers, you didn't have that not certainty. You didn't have some of those potentials. If they said, "Hey, go and snatch a foreign leader somewhere," you're like, "Yeah, it's kind of a risky mission, probably not." As opposed to now, we're like, "Yeah, we can do this." But first of all, Americans, on the ground might die. But number two is, should we? I think,
yeah,
and there's nothing wrong with asking those questions, and then you can sit back, you can marvel at this incredible nature of our capabilities, and I do that all the time. And then you have to say is, we can, but should we do these things? And that's a debatable question.
for sure. To go back to the directed weapons here for a sec, how many of them do you have any estimation on how many of these things actually might exist? And are any entities other than Russia, are you aware of them having access to them?
So in my weird circle on this, the kind of the scuttlebutt is that the Iranians and the Chinese have these as well. Again, cheap, easy to make. They see the effects of it. I think probably the Chinese would be the entity that would make the most sense. But the idea of the proliferation of them, I mean, I think that that is something that is a concern. And when I talk to not just kind of weapons scientists, but also our doctors who have seen the patients from Havana syndrome, from we call them AHIs, anomalous health incidents, over the years, from 2016 to 2026 now. They also see an evolution in the symptoms. And so that means probably the technology has evolved as well. And so, there's also ideas of, at first, did this weapon system have to be line of sight? But now there's some things that have been uncovered that actually might not have to be. That you can bounce it off a certain area. Again, all these things make sense in the scientific world, and so I think that there's a very good chance. My friends in the incredible open source world. These are journalists who have master hackers who've hacked into GRU databases, for example. Certainly see the evolution of this. They see the Russian unit who's experimenting with this, who has it. I mean, in one incredible case, they hacked into a GRU database and they actually have a receipt. A Russian GRU officer is like, "Hey, I have one of these things," and he's going back to his accounting department to account for it. God bless all the times we had to do accounting,
You got to make sure that 1149 is figured out properly.
It's so
The
good.
travel claim needs to have the receipt attached to it.
So we were laughing, and he showed this to me, and he's like, "Hey, I got this." I mean, he hacked in, and I said, "Well, that's not only is it really good proof that these things exist, it's also pretty freaking funny because those of us in government who have to fill out paperwork all the time, I guess the Russians have to as well."
Good.
Yeah.
Enjoy the suck. What would you like the response from the government or officials to be? Like, what would be the pie in the sky? Something that would help you heal the moral injury based off your experience?
So number one, it's something akin to what that NSC, that sit room meeting did. They said, we believe you. You were right. But it's got to be a formal assessment from CIA. And again, there's a hearing today in which the chairman of congressional oversight said to the leaders of the IC, including the DNI, FBI director, CIA director, DNI, the DIA director, and the head of the National Security Agency, they said, do you support recalling the assessment, basically saying that this is nothing? And they said yes. So now you need a new assessment written saying this is real based on the intelligence that's obviously out there. So that's number one. I put it in three bins. One is, acknowledging that this actually occurred. There's some vindication for us on that. Number two is just a promise for access to health care. When you said, you went through NICO, the deputy director of NICO, I went to see him a couple of years ago, and I said, how much did it cost for me to go here? I'm just curious because the agency's, saying that this is expensive for us. He goes, I actually did a study on this because we ingest so many people here, unfortunately, he said it costs $37 for a month of your treatment, $37. So access to health care. And then the last piece, and this is a little more controversial, is the accountability side of it. Like, there are people, and I've named them, others have. I've testified in front of Congress to the full congressional committees. I've named the people by name who literally denied my health care for a year. I suffered terribly for a year. It's amazing I didn't kill myself. I want to see them held accountable. Now, are they going to go to jail? Probably not. But I want to see them named and shamed. And in fact, a CIA Inspector General report has that. They buried it. I can't talk about it. I had to sign an NDA, but they allowed me to come in to try to, mollify me a little bit. And it's brutal towards senior officers who, again, and they said very clearly, Marc was denied health care, which means I suffered. My wife is militant on this. She's like, these fuckers should go to jail for it. So I want to see some accountability. So it's three bins. It's attribution, access to health care, and accountability. I don't think that's too much to ask for.
I don't think it is either. I know we're coming up to the end of our time here. I got one more question for you. And this is one I always try to ask, issues like this, you were directly involved in the IC, the intelligence community, but so many people, to include myself, I was peripheral to it, right? Like I was involved with you, not even really in the fine fix, but the finish was more my repartee and the people that I worked with. And thank you for the intelligence over the years, by the way. Really very helpful. Not always correct, you son of a bitch. But many times I went there, I'm like, God, nobody's here. Damn it. Dry hole again. But for most of the people listening, they have no touch points for this. This might seem like an egregious action of a government against their employees, and the employees, they're serving that same citizen who is listening, and they don't know what to do, or they don't know if there is anything to do. Do you have anything, a direction you can point people? And let's take this larger, like let's talk about the entire government system and the world that you came from. We'll keep it contained to the IC, but for people who want to go research FISA and the 702 and look at, things that have happened, and that's just one small section of, the Patriot Act writ large, which was a great branding campaign. And I think maybe potentially one of the least patriotic things that's ever happened over time, but they don't know what to do. What would you say to somebody who, if they educate themselves and they want to get involved, how can the citizen force the government to listen to what they're saying?
And this is going to sound kind of a simplistic answer, but it's go to your congressman, congresswoman. Congressional representatives actually do listen on issues like this, and I think that that could make a difference. Just the notion that people care. I mean, a lot of people are going to listen to this podcast. I mean, I think 7.5 million people watch 60 Minutes. I can't go to frickin' Whole Foods down the street without neighbors coming up saying, "Oh my God, I saw you on this." So any kind of publicity on this is good, but the members of Congress do react to their constituents. I mean, I think we do know that, and particularly on an issue like this, because what you do is you put it in that context of, well, wait a second, burn pits, Agent Orange, Gulf War syndrome. These are people in the U.S. government who we asked them to do some really unique jobs, and then we didn't take care of them. And to me, it's a very easy story. When I tell this story, and I appreciate the opportunity here to do so, people don't walk away saying, well, that was all bullshit. That was crazy. They're like, why were they treated that way? And if you call your representative and say, hey, I saw this, it's a little troubling. And in particular, if the representative is on any kind of national security committee, and it could be armed services, the intelligence committee, it could be over foreign relations with the State Department, anything in which involves national security. I mean, congressman, and I spent a hell of a lot of time on the Hill because that's all I got. I got the media and I got the Hill. I think they do respond. So, just a letter to the congressman, going to a town hall. They know this. I mean, the one thing about the Hill is, as I've talked to people again, the one of the most amazing hearings was, it was last year. You had Eric Swalwell, a very progressive left-wing member from California, and Eli Crane from Arizona, former special operations. And on this issue, they were completely aligned, and everyone was like, "Holy shit!" And that's what you need. Like, this has got to be bipartisan. This cannot go down a partisan lane at all. Because again, it's just the idea of like, wait a second, we got to take care of our public service. And so that would be my thing. Talk to Congress, rate your congressman.
Well, damn. I guess all I can say, Marc, is thanks for everything that you did for those 27 years, man. I deeply appreciate it. And I hope others do. And I'm sorry that you were treated the way that you were on the way out. Completely undeserved. And I wish, it's not even that I wish, our government needs to do better. It really does, but they're not going to unless the people they are supposed to serve start forcing them.
Agreed. Appreciate the opportunity to come on, and I'm telling they're at NICO right now. If you remember that wall of masks, the masks during art therapy, there's a wall from your old units, and then now there's a wall from CIA with Havana Syndrome victims. It's pretty powerful to see that, and so that to me is we're all in that same kind of fight. And the cohort I went through, were some Air Force and Navy special operations folks, and we bonded together totally because you get it. It's just we're on the same team there.
Well, thank you for your time, man.
Thanks,
and I'm sure we'll talk again. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to learn more about Marc and follow his journey, or hear more about his story, you can follow him on X at @mpolymer, MPOLYMER. Thank you again for listening to Change Agents, an Ironclad original, presented by Firecracker Farm. See you all next week with an all-new episode and an all-new guest. See you then.